Judge Richard Caldwell had always ruled his courtroom with an iron fist. For years he had stood behind that bench, exuding arrogance and control, silencing anyone who dared question him. His word was law, and he made sure every person who walked through those doors knew it. To him, every defendant, every lawyer, every witness was just another pawn in his game. No one was allowed to challenge his authority. That was until Pam Bondi walked into his courtroom. Pam, the seasoned attorney, knew what it meant to fight back. She had spent years standing up to the toughest opponents and taking on the most powerful figures in the legal world. But what happened on this particular day would not just challenge Caldwell's authority, it would expose him for who he truly was, a man hiding behind a veneer of power, a man whose arrogance had finally caught up with him. As the tension in the courtroom built, Caldwell's mocking tone rang out. He was trying to humiliate Pam in front of a live audience, trying to break her confidence, diminish her reputation. He underestimated her, thinking she would crumble under his pressure. He had no idea that this moment would be the catalyst for his ultimate downfall. Pam Bondi didn't just stand her ground, she destroyed him, piece by piece. And when she finally spoke, the truth came crashing down like a bombshell that no one had seen coming. The room went dead silent as the words flowed from Pam's lips. She wasn't just defending herself, she was pulling the curtain back on a scandal that had been buried for years, one that tied Caldwell to corruption so deep that no one, not even the most seasoned reporters, could have imagined. The audience, the reporters, even the judge himself, everyone, was caught off guard. Panic set in as the truth began to unravel and Caldwell's face went pale, his arrogance shattering in an instant. Pam had done what no one else had the courage to do. She exposed a web of lies and corruption that had been carefully concealed by the very people who were supposed to uphold justice. Caldwell's grip on his courtroom slipped away as the walls closed in on him. What started as an attempt to humiliate Pam Bondi turned into the greatest mistake of his career. The power dynamic in that courtroom shifted within seconds. The once feared judge, who thought he controlled everything, was now on the defensive, caught in a lie too big to deny. The media, the reporters, everyone had their phones out recording the moment when a man who thought he was untouchable suddenly realized how fragile his empire of arrogance truly was. And just when it seemed like the truth couldn't get any more shocking, Pam's final words hit like a lightning bolt. The room gasped. The judge, a man who had once been invincible, was now crumbling under the weight of his own corruption. The downfall of Judge Richard Caldwell had begun, and it was all thanks to Pam Bondi's relentless pursuit of justice. Stay tuned, because what happens next is not just about a courtroom showdown. It's a story of power, corruption, and the one person who was brave enough to take it all down. Judge Richard Caldwell's name had become synonymous with power and dominance. In his courtroom, he was more than just a judge. He was a king. His gavel was the final word, and his word was law. For years, Caldwell controlled his courtroom with a relentless grip, manipulating every situation to maintain his sense of superiority. Lawyers, defendants, witnesses, everyone knew their place. If you dared to challenge him, you would quickly learn the consequences. From the moment he first put on that black robe, Richard Caldwell's reputation was built on intimidation and fear. He had a knack for ruling with such authority that no one ever questioned his decisions. His persona was that of a no-nonsense, hard-nosed judge who would not tolerate any disrespect or defiance. The courtroom under his reign was a place where any challenge to his authority was swiftly crushed, sometimes with cold precision, sometimes with theatrical flair, but always with the same end result. He remained untouchable. Caldwell's control over his courtroom wasn't just about legal prowess. It was about the aura of invincibility he had built over time. He was a man who had learned the art of manipulation, using every rule, every law, every loophole to keep people in check. If you were a defendant, you'd be subjected to his harshest sentences, often without mercy. If you were a lawyer, you'd face his sharp tongue and biting remarks with no room for error. And if you were anyone who dared speak up or challenge him, you'd quickly feel the wrath of his power, whether through public humiliation or swift punitive action. It wasn't just his rulings that struck fear into the hearts of those who appeared before him. It was his unpredictable nature. Caldwell could go from being cold and calculating to downright explosive in an instant. His ability to shift from measured control to fiery anger kept everyone on edge. Lawyers walked on eggshells around him, careful not to provoke his ire. Judges, court staff, even the audience. No one dared to openly question his decisions. The few who did quickly found themselves facing consequences, their careers or lives forever altered by their defiance. But behind the scenes, there were whispers. Some said Caldwell was involved in more than just legal rulings. There were rumors of questionable associations, off-the-record deals, and backroom corruption, but no one dared to investigate. Why? Because Caldwell had spent years building an ironclad reputation, and he had the resources and connections to silence anyone who might try to expose him. It seemed like nothing could ever bring down this towering figure, until Pam Bondi came into the picture. Pam Bondi wasn't just another attorney, she had a reputation of her own, a reputation for fighting for justice no matter the cost. For years, Pam had made a name for herself as a relentless and strategic prosecutor, unafraid of taking on powerful figures in the political and legal world. Her rise through the ranks had been a testament to her skill, intelligence, and unyielding commitment to holding those in power accountable. Where others saw obstacles, Pam saw opportunities to expose corruption, and she wasn't afraid to take on the tough cases. Her reputation for standing up to authority was exactly what made her a target in the eyes of someone like Judge Caldwell. As the state's attorney general, Pam was used to dealing with high-profile cases, and she had been involved in investigations that threatened the status quo. She had a track record of taking on corrupt officials and dismantling systems of power, but Judge Caldwell wasn't like any other public figure Pam had faced. He was untouchable, or at least that's what he thought. The tension between Caldwell and Bondi didn't happen overnight. It began gradually, building like a storm on the horizon. It started with a case that would ultimately expose more than anyone had bargained for, a case where Caldwell's actions seemed more than just questionable. Pam, ever the meticulous investigator, began to piece together the troubling details surrounding some of Caldwell's rulings. The more she dug, the more she uncovered the whispers that had once been dismissed. As gossip began to feel like something more sinister, it wasn't just that Caldwell was ruling harshly, it was the pattern of favoritism, the selective application of the law, and the way he seemed to protect certain individuals who had enough power to keep their secrets buried. Pam, driven by a desire to root out corruption, began to sense that there was more going on in Caldwell's courtroom than met the eye. She started to suspect that this was not just a case of a tough judge, but a man who was playing a far more dangerous game. Soon, the clash between Pam and Caldwell became inevitable. Both were too strong-willed, too determined to let things slide. Caldwell, with his history of dominance and power, underestimated Pam's resolve. He saw her as just another lawyer who would back down once faced with his authority. But what he didn't count on was her unwillingness to be intimidated. Her sharp mind and her relentless drive to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The stage was set. Pam was preparing to expose a corruption scandal that had been carefully hidden, and Caldwell was preparing to dismiss her concerns as just another attack on his credibility. What neither of them knew was that the day they would meet in the courtroom would change everything, and it would be the moment when Pam Bondi would bring Judge Richard Caldwell's empire of fear crashing down. The courtroom was a battleground. Tension filled the air, thick and palpable as the proceedings moved forward. The normally composed and stoic Judge Richard Caldwell sat at the bench, his gavel poised in his hand like a weapon waiting for its moment to strike. His sharp eyes glared down at the room, scanning each person with an air of superiority. His confidence was unshakable, his control of the room absolute. For years this had been his domain, a place where no one dared challenge him, a place where he was king. But today, things were different. The subject of the day, a case that seemed straightforward at first, had slowly unraveled into something far more explosive. Pam Bondi, the relentless attorney general, was no stranger to pressure. She had faced down powerful figures before, taken on cases that seemed impossible, and always came out on top. But today, she found herself sitting at the defendant's table in a way she never expected. The moment arrived when Judge Caldwell's patience, as thin as it was, finally snapped. Pam, in her usual fashion, had refused to bow to the judge's demand to sit quietly. She was determined to make sure the truth came out. Her voice, steady and calm, had challenged his authority in the most polite yet defiant way possible. But, For Caldwell, it wasn't about the facts, it wasn't about justice, it was about power. His power and the audacity of anyone questioning it. He leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he looked down at her with disgust. "Ms. Bondi," he said, his voice smooth, almost condescending, "it seems you think you can run this courtroom." There was a flicker of amusement in his eyes, the kind of look you give someone when you know you've already won, and you're simply toying with them. "Well, let me remind you," he continued, his voice raising slightly, "you are not in control here." The room fell silent, every eye fixed on the two of them. The energy in the air shifted instantly, a heavy weight pressing down on the atmosphere. It was clear that Judge Caldwell was making an example of Pam, attempting to put her in her place, to break her down in front of the audience and the courtroom full of reporters. But he didn't realize one thing. Pam wasn't like everyone else. She wasn't going to cower under his gaze or his words. She wasn't afraid of his power. Pam took a slow, deliberate breath. She wasn't going to let him dictate the terms of this confrontation. "Your Honor," she said, her voice even yet laced with an undeniable strength, "I am here to seek justice, not to engage in a power struggle. But if you are implying that you control the truth in this courtroom, you are mistaken." The room held its collective breath as the words hung in the air. The arrogance in Caldwell's eyes faltered for just a second, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. But then his expression hardened and he leaned back in his chair, clearly not ready to back down. He raised his gavel, tapping it sharply against the wood, signaling his authority. "This is my courtroom, Ms. Bondi," he snapped, his tone colder. "Now, and you will show the proper respect, or you will be removed." His words were meant to intimidate, to bring her down, but Pam stood firm, her gaze unwavering. And then, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment, Pam's eyes gleamed, with something much more dangerous than defiance, determination. "You're right, Judge," she said, her voice still calm but edged with something sharper. "This is your courtroom, but it is not your kingdom." A murmur rippled through the room, reporters scribbling notes, the audience's attention now fully captured by the tension between the two. It was clear, this wasn't just another legal argument, this was something deeper, something much more personal. Pam wasn't just fighting for a case anymore, she was fighting for something much bigger, the truth. The courtroom seemed to freeze in time. Every word from both sides weighed heavily in the air and the audience could feel the shift. The sense of dominance that Judge Caldwell had carried so effortlessly was now wavering, like a fading light, flickering in the darkness. Pam had done something he had never expected. She had flipped the power dynamic and the effect was immediate. The courtroom that had once been his domain was now hers. "You think you can intimidate me, Judge?" Pam's voice rang out, cutting through the silence. "You think your power and your arrogance will silence me?" She stood up now, no longer seated at the defendant's table but commanding the center of the room, her presence undeniable. "I'm not here to play your games. I'm here to expose what you've been hiding all these years." A gasp echoed through the room as Pam's words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Caldwell's face paled. For the first time in years, the judge's expression betrayed something close to fear. His hand trembled slightly as he gripped his gavel. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, trying to hold on to whatever semblance of control he still had. "You have no proof of any of this." Pam smiled, a smile that sent chills down everyone's spine. "I don't need proof, Judge. You've already provided it yourself." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and the reporters, once passive observers, were now frantically typing into their phones, realizing they were witnessing the unraveling of a powerful man's carefully constructed empire. It was as if the air itself had shifted. The whispers of corruption, the rumors that had surrounded Caldwell for years were now becoming a reality. The judge, who once held the power to control the room with just a glance, now found himself exposed, vulnerable. The shift in power was undeniable. The courtroom that had once echoed with Caldwell's arrogance now felt like a stage for Pam Bondi's triumph. The woman who had walked in as an attorney was now holding the gavel of truth, and Judge Caldwell's once unassailable authority was crumbling. The room, once suffocating under the weight of Caldwell's dominance, now felt alive with the possibility of justice, with the spark of something much bigger than this single case. As Pam stood there unwavering, the realization settled in. Caldwell had underestimated her. The truth, the thing he had so carefully concealed, was now being brought into the light. It was a moment of pure power, a moment when the balance shifted, and the courtroom was no longer his kingdom. It was hers. The air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation, and all eyes were glued to Pam Bondi, who stood tall, a figure of confidence and quiet fury. For a moment, it felt as if time itself had come to a standstill. The room held its breath. Judge Caldwell, still reeling from Pam's defiant words, tried desperately to regain control of the situation. But Pam was no longer playing by the same rules. She had broken free of the shackles of courtroom etiquette that had always held others in check, and now she was ready to lay bare the truth that had been buried for far too long. The very thing that Judge Caldwell had tried so hard to suppress was now on the verge of being exposed, and it wasn't just a simple piece of information, it was the kind of revelation that would change everything. Pam's voice, calm but laced with an undeniable edge, rang through the courtroom. "You've hidden it all, haven't you, Judge?" Her words cut through the tension like a blade. "All the years of corruption, the backdoor deals, the shady alliances. You thought you could get away with it. You thought no one would ever find out." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Whispers like a slow wave of disbelief rippled across the room. Some of the reporters leaned in, scribbling furiously in their notebooks, while others pulled out their phones, desperately trying to capture every word. Judge Caldwell's face, once flush with anger, now paled, his jaw tightening, as if he were trying to choke down the truth rising to the surface. His eyes darted to Pam, then to the audience, but there was nowhere left to hide. The walls had come crashing down around him. Pam didn't give him a chance to recover. "You've been running a system of favors and kickbacks for years, Judge. And today we're going to shine a light on every dark corner you've hidden in." The courtroom fell into a deathly silence, the weight of her words sinking in. Pam turned to face the audience, her eyes scanning the room, locking on a few key individuals, her allies in the case. She wasn't just making accusations. She was offering proof. She was about to reveal what no one in that room had dared to say out loud. "You see, Judge Caldwell," she continued, her voice growing more resolute with each passing word, "I know about the deals you made with certain lobbyists, deals that were never meant to see the light of day. I know about the financial arrangements you made under the table, the very ones that kept your pockets full while you turned a blind eye to the needs of the people." She turned to face the judge again, her eyes cold, unyielding. "You thought you could silence everyone, intimidate anyone who dared question you, but today that ends?" Pam reached into her briefcase, pulling out a set of documents, evidence that had been painstakingly gathered over months of investigation. She laid them out on the table in front of her, the rustling of the paper a dramatic sound that echoed through the courtroom. "These," she said, her hand hovering over the stack, "are the smoking guns, the financial records, the emails, the communications between you and those you've been working with. It's all here, Judge. Every transaction, every illegal arrangement you thought you could keep hidden." She flipped the first page open, and a silence more profound than before swept across the room. The reporters, sensing the magnitude of what was happening, stopped typing, their eyes fixed on the evidence. No one dared to speak, no one dared to move. The courtroom had become a stage for an undeniable truth, and Pam was the master storyteller, weaving the scandal into the very air they breathed. Pam's fingers traced the lines of the document as she began to read from it, her voice steady but powerful. "On this date," she said, "Judge Caldwell approved a deal that would grant a construction company an exclusive contract worth millions of dollars without any bidding process. In exchange, the company executives made a substantial donation to a fund connected to his personal finances. The deal was shady, and the money flowed just as quietly as it came in." There was a collective gasp from the courtroom. The silence that followed was oppressive. As the full weight of the revelation sank in, Judge Caldwell's knuckles were white as he gripped the arms of his chair. His eyes were wide now, a man on the verge of complete collapse. His empire was crumbling piece by piece under Pam's ruthless spotlight. Pam didn't stop. She kept going, pulling out more documents, revealing more shocking details. "This document," she continued, "shows how Judge Caldwell used his position to leverage power for his own benefit. He manipulated the system, using his influence over court cases to ensure favorable outcomes for those who could afford to pay for them." As she read each new piece of evidence, the judge's face turned an even deeper shade of crimson, his lips barely moving as he tried, unsuccessfully, to refute her claims. But the truth was undeniable. The evidence was overwhelming, and it doesn't stop there, Pam said, her voice now carrying the full weight of her conviction. Judge Caldwell wasn't just lining his own pockets. He was selling justice itself. He was trafficking in favoritism, betraying the very people he was supposed to protect. This isn't just corruption, it's a betrayal of the people's trust. With each word, Pam dismantled the judge's carefully constructed facade. The empire of control, intimidation, and power he had built over the years was coming apart, piece by piece. What had once seemed untouchable, Judge Caldwell's authority, his reputation, his carefully curated image, was now nothing but a pile of rubble. As Pam finished revealing the final piece of evidence, she looked directly at the judge. "You can try to deny it all you want, Judge, but the truth is out now, and you will answer for every decision you've made, every deal you've cut." Her voice was steady, but there was an undeniable fire burning behind her words, a fire that would not be extinguished until justice had been served. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move. They were witnessing a moment that would echo throughout the history of the judicial system. A moment when the mask of power was ripped away, revealing the ugly truth beneath. The courtroom was suffocating with tension. The air, thick with the weight of truth, seemed to press down on everyone present. Judge Caldwell, once a towering figure of authority, now stood exposed and vulnerable. His face had lost its familiar arrogance, now pale and sweating, as though the very walls of his courtroom were closing in on him. His attempt to regain control was pitiful. His usual air of superiority was nowhere to be found. In its place was fear, the fear of being seen for what he truly was. "You've had your run, Judge." Pam Bondi's voice rang out, cold and unforgiving. "But the truth has come out now. There's no going back." Each word hit like a sharp blow, and you could feel the tremor of disbelief ripple through the room. Caldwell's power, which had been built on lies and corruption, was now shattered, completely dismantled by a single woman, standing fearless in the center of the storm. The silence in the room was deafening, only broken by the sound of reporters hastily tapping their phones, their cameras flashing as they captured the moment. The world was watching. Judge Caldwell opened his mouth to speak, but his voice was a broken whisper. I didn't." His words faltered and trailed off, lost in the overwhelming weight of the truth. His hands trembled, gripping the podium like a lifeline, but it was no use. The mask had fallen, and there was nothing left of his former self. "I didn't mean to." His voice cracked as if he had just realized the full extent of his own destruction. Pam wasn't about to let him off the hook. She stepped forward, her eyes burning with the fire of someone who had fought for justice too long to let it slip away now. "You can't deny it, Judge. It's all right here in front of you. Your corruption, your lies. The public deserves to know." The room buzzed with electricity. Every person in that courtroom, every soul who had been forced to suffer under Caldwell's iron fist, felt the surge of power that Pam's words carried. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no escaping it now. The judge, once the unchallenged king of his courtroom, was nothing more than a man exposed for his crimes. Caldwell's face twisted in agony, a stark contrast to the man he had once been. The reality of his fall was sinking in. The sound of his breath, shallow and frantic, filled the silence as he tried in vain to compose himself. His attempts to regain control were pathetic, his words lacking the strength he once wielded so effortlessly. "The people you've wronged, Judge," Pam continued, her voice a mixture of righteous fury and icy calm. "They're not going to let you get away with it. Your time is up." Her words stung, like salt in an open wound. She wasn't just fighting for the moment. She was fighting for every person who had been crushed under Caldwell's reign of terror. The power dynamic had shifted, and it was clear that Pam was no longer just an attorney. She was the face of justice itself. Caldwell's eyes darted around the room, but there was nowhere left to hide. The whispers had begun. The reporters were not just spectators, they were now the bearers of the truth. It would spread like wildfire, and there was no way Caldwell could stop it. Pam took a final step forward, her gaze unwavering as she locked eyes with the judge. "You may have silenced others in the past, but not today. Not anymore." Her voice was low, dangerous, and final, like the sound of a judge's gavel hitting the wood. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the final verdict to land. Caldwell's shoulders slumped. His empire, his carefully constructed kingdom, had crumbled, and he stood there broken, in front of everyone. He had tried to break others, to silence them, but today he had been broken. "This isn't just about you, Judge," Pam added, her voice rising in strength. "It's about the justice system. It's about ensuring that no one is above the law." The weight of her words pressed down on the judge like a heavy blanket, suffocating him. He had lost, and he knew it. Outside the courtroom, the storm was just beginning. The media would seize on the story, spreading it across every screen. The downfall of a judge, once untouchable, would become the symbol of everything wrong with the system. And Pam Bondi had made sure that the truth would never be buried again. The consequences for Judge Richard Caldwell were swift and unforgiving. Within hours of Pam Bondi's explosive revelation, his once powerful empire began to crumble, piece by piece. The media frenzy erupted like wildfire, with every major news outlet broadcasting the courtroom moment that had shaken the legal system to its core. Caldwell's name, once synonymous with authority, was now a symbol of corruption, deceit, and abuse of power. The story spread across social media, with people condemning him in thousands of tweets, articles, and posts. His face, pale and defeated, was plastered across every screen. The downfall of a man who had once felt invincible was now the subject of public discourse, and no one could look away. Behind the scenes, investigations into his past actions were launched. His long history of ruling with an iron fist, silencing those who dared challenge him, was now under intense scrutiny. The whispers of corruption that had been confined to hushed conversations were now being investigated by authorities with fresh urgency. Caldwell's judicial career, built on manipulation and intimidation, had come to a screeching halt. The power he once wielded so effortlessly had disappeared, leaving him with nothing but the ruins of his former life. For Pam Bondi, the battle was not just about exposing one man's corruption. It was about ensuring that justice prevailed. Her response had been nothing short of legendary. In that courtroom, she had single-handedly taken down a man who had once thought himself untouchable. But the victory was about more than just legal triumph. It was a moral victory, a statement that even those at the top could not escape the law. The respect she garnered from her peers and the public was palpable. She had not only won the case, she had reminded the world that justice would always find a way. But beyond the courtroom, Pam's actions sparked a wider reflection. Her courage inspired many. It wasn't just about exposing a corrupt judge. It was about the power of truth and standing up when it mattered most. The people who had been watching, the ones who had lived under the oppression of such figures of authority, could now see that change was possible. Pam's courage was the spark that ignited hope in the hearts of many who felt powerless, showing them that even in the darkest of moments, the truth could shine through. And as for Caldwell, the emotional toll was unbearable. His once pristine reputation had been shattered beyond repair. The media would never let him forget the truth Pam had revealed, and the consequences of his actions would follow him for the rest of his life. His downfall, like a slow-motion train wreck, would continue to unfold as more layers of his corruption were uncovered. The man who had once held all the cards was now a pawn in a game he could no longer control. In the aftermath of the courtroom battle, as the dust began to settle, one thing was clear. Pam Bondi's bravery had sparked a wave of change, and as the world reflected on what had happened, they were reminded of a crucial truth. Sometimes it only takes one person to stand up for what's right to bring about the justice we all deserve. Are we truly holding those in power accountable, or are we too afraid to speak out? The truth has been exposed, but what happens next is up to us. Let's not forget that it only takes one voice to make a difference. What will yours be?